Yeah, I'm going to hold mine. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Like she said, I'm Hannah and Alex. We have been married for almost 12 years in December, and we have 4 kids, and ages 10, 8, 4, and 3. 4 and 3 are 12 months and 5 days apart. So those of you who have twins, I can kind of sympathize because that about did me in. And so we've been married for almost 12 years, and we're really excited to be here today. And I want you to know, first and foremost, that we come to you very humbly because we understand some of you in here obviously have been married longer than we have. And some of you, even moms, have been married longer, and you guys might have more knowledge that we do. But a lot of what we have came from failure in marriage and just failure in communication. Our first 5 years of marriage really was spent not communicating. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But when we finally got to a point of not crisis, but like we had a crossroad of like, we've got to decide how we're going to move forward with communication, we realized that we had spent the last 5 years not even letting each other in on how we were really feeling and struggling where God had placed us. And it really opened our eyes of we were both lonely those 5 years and didn't even realize it. And so anyways, we're coming into that. And with everything we give, a lot of it is resources we've seen. It's things we've learned from our failures and other couples who have put these practical tips into place, and they've seen success with it.
Yeah, I think in that 5-year mark is where we had what the young people now call the DTR, define the relationship a little bit deeper for that. And so, yeah, we're still learning. We're definitely not pros at this, and so just trying to give some advice on that. We do a ton of premarital counseling. That's something that in my role of working with college and young adults, many of you probably got married at a younger age, and so that's my role now is to do a lot of that. And I choose not to do that alone because Hannah brings a ton of value in that, so it's really nice for this future spouse to hear a different side of that. So it's been nice to walk this together and not one-sided. I think 2 Saturdays ago, I did perform, if you know the Morgans, Julia Morgan, Julia and Davis just got married. I think that was number 16 in the last 4 years of weddings I've done. So or 3 years. So it's been it's a revolving door. So when you say they're contemplating marriage, no, they're not. They're going. We just needed somebody just to sign the document for us, and that's me. So, but we try to give them some good advice and good feedback. And on that, what we do, we base all of our talks with premarital counseling and even some marriage and personal counseling that we do and coaching that we do out of primarily one passage of Scripture. And while we're not going to read this passage in depth today, if you want to take notes on this, is Colossians chapter 3 is one of the main, if not the sole passage that we really strive to embody when we are giving wise counsel, not just in marriages, but also just individually as well, in business, in the private life, as ministers and on the staff. This is something that we try to be intentional with as I do this and as Hannah I know does as well. But it's essentially, it's putting on the new self. It's dropping away what we know as society tells us as a sinful nature. Put off these things. This is the 2 ways to put it. Put off these things, then put on these things from Colossians 3. And so if you, maybe in your small group or other times, take a moment this week or today, even this afternoon, and to listen and or read through Colossians 3 verses 1 through 17, 2 great parallels in Scripture of what to put off and then what to bring on and what to embody with that.
I think what's cool, too, if you look at that chapter, it says how you should have relationships with people with kindness and humility. And Paul finishes that section, and then the whole next section is rules for Christian households. Wives, submit to your husbands. So he goes into all of that. So everything we're talking about of the put on, put off is the precursor to then the stuff that Paul gives about what a Christian marriage should look like.
So one piece of information that we always start with in our premarital counseling and other areas of relationship is there was a study done in 2015 by the Smileys. They're known nationwide for doing marriage retreats and different things. And this study that they did, they polled and asked how many minutes per day how many couples per week, how many minutes per week do couples spend in meaningful conversation? So here's what I want you to do. Out of all the minutes in a week, I don't have that number, I have it written in our little other book, but all the minutes in the week, how many minutes are spent between a couple talking about meaningful conversation? All right, I want you to come up with your tables real quick and you tell us what you think the number is. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Go. Meaningful conversation, minutes per week. $15 seconds. Get ready to lock in your answers. All right. Lock in your answers. Be ready. So, according to this study, and I think this is 2015, so I think this has only gotten worse, if I could say it that way. There were 3 avenues that couples communicated. One was administrative, one was conflict, and the other one was meaningful conversation. So of those 3 areas in this study that they produced, how many minutes per week were spent in meaningful conversation? Now, when you're asking, hey, honey, how was your day? And then it goes into, well, I had to do this at the school and this and whatever. That's not meaningful conversation. That turns into administrative because you had to check this off and do whatever. So let me hear your answers. I'm going to go real quick. Have a spokesperson for your table. This is how we do college ministry, by the way, so I'm just bringing that flair to you. So have a spokesperson at your table ready to go when I point to you. And all you got to do is just say how many minutes. Ready? 5 minutes a week. 60 an hour. 120, 10 minutes a week, 30 to 60, all right? 7 minutes a week, 15 minutes a week. According to this study, it was 4 minutes a week of meaningful conversation. Now, while you may gasp at that and can't believe it, think back just until Sunday and how much meaningful, not conflict resolution, not figuring stuff out with the kids, not administrative of who's taking who to gymnastics and all this other stuff, but meaningful conversation that you've had since Sunday. That's something to really put in our, I can't say pipe and smoke it, but into your cud and chew it, that idea just to think about, and just to realize, man, there is a lot that happens throughout our week that consumes our time away from intentional time together. And something that in this study says, and Hannah, if you were going to say this, I'm sorry to steal it, that in this study it says too that if you're not intentionally drawing together, you're what? Unintentionally drifting apart. And that's where that meaningful conversation comes in. And it doesn't, as a guy, meaningful conversation sometimes stresses me out. All right, but it doesn't have to be that way because in our mind, I'm trained in team building and group facilitation, and so anytime I approach a new team that I do team building with, they think we're going to hold hands and lean backwards and all, emotions. While that's in there somewhere, that's just the proxy. That's what people think happens, and there's so much more to that. Just like in here, we're going to go through administrative, conflict, and meaningful conversations. There's so much more to it than just what we think, or as a man, that we think it's going to be. Oh, well, here we go. We're going to offload here. Well, not necessarily.
And I want to start off with this. I have it later on, but I think we just need to start off with why communication is so important. Communication is the tool that God uses for you and your spouse to be intimate together. That's what cultivates intimacy within the relationship. It allows you to be fully known by your spouse and for your spouse to let themselves be fully known to you, right? And communication is what starts all that. Even if we're talking about intimacy with sex, it starts with communication most of the time, right? So communication is so essential. And here's the other reason why it's important. When it is not being used, if the tool of healthy communication is not being used, we also have an enemy as believers. And what does that enemy like to do? The enemy likes to get in our head. If your spouse and you are not sharing what's going on and communicating, then that leaves room for assumptions that you make of how they might be feeling, and then it allows the enemy to also feed into that and give you his assumptions about your spouse. And so it is so essential. So as we go into the practical tips of administrative, conflict and meaningful conversation. I just want you to understand why this is so important and why it is worth fighting for in your marriage. And I understand that it's hard as a wife if your husband's not leading that. And so we even have questions for Alex that I came up with to ask him to share with y'all too. So we'll get to it in a minute. But let's go on to the first.
Well, I just want to say, too, I think it's important to look at, I don't want to over-spiritualize this, because I think all too often in Christian circles we can over-spiritualize things, but I do want to spiritualize this, too, if that makes sense. And looking from the garden all the way to Revelation, we see where the Lord desires companionship with us and desires communication with us. If we're going to be like Christ and like the Lord, that communication is key, from the garden of talking about it all the way through the Israelites, of him guiding in Job where he says, dress like a man, so there's some hard conversations that happen too, all the way through compassion that we see throughout Scripture too. So it's biblical as we model the Lord, and to have a model of communication as well.
Yeah, so the first tier of communication is administrative. That's where most of your conversation does fall under, especially with kids. You're talking about finances, schedules, the day-to-day, the house chores, all of that falls into administrative. And it's essential for the operation to run smoothly. So even though it may not be the most important, it's important, right? Because if you're not even communicating at that first level, then there's going to be more conflict coming up in the future. So here are 3 tips that we were like, I think these are the most important one when it comes to administrative conversation. The first one is your tone matters. Your tone matters. There's such a difference when you are asking your husband a question about finances, or a question about, hey, can we divide this up and you take this kid here and this kid there, with your tone. If I say it all the time to our kids, watch your tone when they're talking to their siblings. But it's because I've learned that I have to watch my tone too, so that it's not that nagging and that almost like degrading, like I'm the team captain, you're not following the expectation I have, so get with it.
Yeah, tone matters. What I tell Emery, our daughter, our first daughter, is I just say try again, because her tone is that of a 19-year-old. I mean, it is brutal. And so I'll hear her from across the backyard, and I'll say, Emmy, try again. Zeke, don't touch that. She'll do it just less tonal, but still with the same demeanor. You know what I'm saying? So I think as a husband too, it's something that tone matters, even on our end, given back to you, and not to mix up the idea of tone and vocal level, if that makes sense. Because you can raise voices, especially in emergency situations and different things, but you can, I don't know, it's the idea of just how inflection works in your voice, but the tone that you give and how you give it is something that is very powerful. And we were joking last night as we were going over our notes, I don't know if you're familiar with, if you're on social media or not, but the reel of the woman, what's she say? She's like trying to parent my kids nicely.
What?
And she says, what?
Have you seen
But
that?
she says it, what, 4 different.
Her kid's like, Mom, what? I'm sorry. What? I'm sorry.
It's still the tone.
What? She's like having to fix her tone because it's just that, what? What do you want? So she's fixing her tone.
Just
Anyways.
working its way down. But as someone who is coming in from a day of work, yes, I work here at the church, but that requires me to do many different auxiliaries as well. So when I come in, there's just been a crazy day sometimes. It just matters the tone that we have. When we still have responsibilities to each other and our family that have to get done, that not just the first walk in the door, but even later at the dinner table and other things too, tone matters, especially in administrative pieces, trying to get things finished on that.
And the tone should reflect respect for each other. Just like you said, husbands talk to you and how you talk to your husband, it should be one of mutual respect. All right, the second practical tip is with administrative stuff is just gratitude, having gratitude for when you are working as a team and verbally telling them that, and thank you for doing this, or thank you for doing that. We had one, I don't know, it was a deeper conversation, I guess, where we were talking about some heavy things, and he pointed out that at that time, I wasn't like affirming him and what he was doing, and he was working really hard, and I saw it, and I knew that, but I was not verbally telling it to him. So there's so much beauty when you are being thankful towards each other and how you are working as a team, which goes into the third thing, which is a team mindset. The administrative stuff, sometimes as moms, we can feel like the default parents, especially if you're a stay-at-home mom, a lot of that does fall on you. But also having that communication of like, as a team, how are we going to approach this behavior issue in our kid? As a team, how are we going to approach the finances and the bills coming up that are stressing both of us out, even though I know you're the provider? And so when you're doing it that way, it also is opening up with the team mindset of, how can I help you accomplish this? And also teaching, your husbands aren't here, but hoping that they would ask you, hey, how can I help you accomplish your to-do list as well?
There's an old Christian punk rock band, if you will, back in the day, Reliant K, had a line that said, we should get jerseys because we make a good team, you know? And so that's something that I keep in my mind all the time, is that we are a team. And I'll say this, as if you are a stay-at-home mom, or you're the primary caregiver, if you will, at home, if a husband works, is something to look at. Like, there are times when it's just like your husband walks in the door, it's just like hand the kid and you're out to Starbucks or just a drive or whatever else. That's okay, but give us a heads up on the way home if you can. Like, because more than likely, like, we want to spend time with our kids too, but the idea of just like shooting a text at like 2:00 or something like that, like, hey, I just want you to know I got them from Carline and they are ballistic, you know, and so it's just been a day, da da da. You don't have to
come get your children.
Yeah, it doesn't. You don't have to dump truck through a text to them, but at the same time, it's just like giving a heads up for the tone, instead of like, well, you just take them, you know, and then leave it. Like, there's like 3 things. It's like, whoa, let's back up just a second and try to anticipate doing this a little bit different, because you need space too. And I'm thankful you're in this room, getting invested in throughout this semester. But like, you need space too to decompress, to be intentional with your time and stuff too, and believe it or not, away from your children. And so like, giving that team mindset with your husband and having that same page can be super helpful. But also just giving a heads up on some of the administrative things too. Like, hey, we don't have like team meetings every Sunday night. While that would be a great idea, but to debrief the week, some of you do that. I know some families that do have that rhythm. But even just saying, hey, what do we have this week? I know Emmy's got gymnastics Tuesday night. I'm at BCM this Thursday. Just walking through that, so that when I have to say, hey, can we just not do this one because there's other stuff happening? So you're able to have those administrative conversations a little bit easier without pointing fingers or taking offense to something that never should have been taken offense to.
Slide over. You're out of the frame.
Hey.
There we go.
They heard the voice. They don't need to see me. They can hear it.
All right. I'm trying to get through on time. You want to do that next?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's my question that I had for Alex. What is the best way for a wife to ask her husband to complete a task, and how should she approach it if she has asked several times already?
So we're assuming that's a broken sink or shower or a garage door. Or, I'm just kidding.
This is an experiential question.
So how can you handle this? How does a man? So first off, I can't give an answer for your husband exactly. I don't know him on that level, except for Kevin, maybe. Might be the only one I know in that way. And I will say this: if your husband's in the trades, you're out of luck, because the plumber's house is always going to leak, and that type of thing. So. But one thing I would say is seek understanding and knowing what's going on in his work life, social life, and private life at the moment. So if you've asked him to do something, but yet, let's say your husband's an accountant, you've asked him to fix something and it's April, it's probably not going to happen, because there's just so much happening in that season of life. If your husband's in the trades and works lawn care or owns that type of business or is in that, probably summer months, a lot of housework's probably not going to happen because of just the nature of what's happening in their business. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but at the same time, it's just knowing that the urgency might be a little bit different if you can just get by with that is one thing. So I'm not giving an excuse to that, but just kind of seeking understanding and knowing what's going on, and even just if there's some financial strength right now, like, all right, how do we get creative with this to help approach this together? The other thing as a husband is what I like to see is, or would encourage, is just, are there projects you can do together that just kind of just involve you with that to help out a little bit? Maybe it's something you're seeking to learn a little bit with that too, and let him teach you something with that. I'll tell you another way to get a project done quickly, if you would stop the video for a second, no, I'm just kidding, is to go to Lowe's and buy the cheapest drill you can find, and just start walking through the living room with that type of thing, and just, he'll get off the couch very quickly.
Or you can keep it cheap and just carry your box of thumbtacks to hang every picture in your
I
house.
hate that. Gosh, that's the worst.
I do it when he's gone, because I did it one time when he was there, and he was like, I'm getting my hammer and nails. I'll be there in just a second.
No, you hung the drapes sideways. Like, I was just like, use a level, you know?
did.
But like, anyway.
Yeah, I did.
Asking, do you mind if I do that? Can I take care of this? Be consistent. Here's a big piece. And I'm going to use this word, and I don't mean it the way that our society has pushed it. But being consistent in your asking without being pessimistic or nagging in what you're doing, because there's a difference in that. Like, you know, when your child is asking you something and you hear them, okay, give me just a second, I'll get to that, versus mom, there's just a difference there. So I don't mean that in the societal way that we have pushed that nagging word, but just you can be consistent in the ask and just try to get a time like, hey, can we do this weekend? The other thing is just tell them that, hey, why don't you have the guys over to do a campfire in the backyard and y'all tackle this? Or just say your in-laws are coming over and he'll get stuff done really quick. You know, that's another thing too, just to happen. Sometimes he gets the things done that you have no desire to be done, too. So anyway, I think too, just trying to figure out, hey, how do we, team player again, work on this together and just help with the tone, with the ask, with the idea of just expressing that too. And I think this is where I mentioned too of just being, oh yeah, this is something that I thought was really huge. And this helps me get stuff done quicker for Hannah, is if, hey babe, this is kind of inconveniencing our day, our routine after you go to work. This has been kind of frustrating for us to deal. We've dealt with it for a little bit, for a couple weeks, but like trying to figure out. Our shower messed up with one of the things, it's called an escutcheon, but I won't go into that anyway. But I was like, yeah, we need to fix that. And so we used for a week and a half or so, 2 weeks, the bathroom in the hallway. And it just got to be super inconvenient. And so like now, like I can deal with anything. Like I'm fine, you know, like it doesn't bother me. But knowing that all of our kids are compiling, trying to take showers in one spot or whatever in timelines, it's just tough. And Hannah's plethora of hair products and stuff are all over now yet another counter. And so and being silly with that too, just knowing that, hey, this is an inconvenience to our family. Do you think we could tackle this a little bit sooner? And so,
I think
absolutely. Why would I hesitate?
Not saying like, can you fix it right now? Like, hey, over the next week, can you try to get to that? That also is, I think, brings it down a notch from not being as demanding.
Yeah.
All right. The second level or tier of conversation is conflict. And it's next because it requires being fully seen by your spouse and being vulnerable. And sometimes we're uncomfortable with even letting our spouse in on how they're making us feel or how we're dealing with something. And so one thing I want to point out about conflict, we heard this in our premarital material that we use, that conflict is good, combat is bad. And it sounds so like you guys have been married for several years, so I'm sure you're like, yeah, I know that. But really when you run your responses through that lens, okay, is how I'm responding more of a combat and like an attack, or is it conflict? Some of the most conflicting conversations we've talked through strengthen us as a couple more than any of the like good conversations. So conflict is good. A lot of us try to avoid it at all costs. That's how it was for a long time. And then once I learned like, okay, I can let him know XYZ, and he's going to respond lovingly, and we can work on this together and not alone, it changed. And it allowed that intimacy in our relationship to go even deeper.
I would say, too, if you're going to take that approach, or if that's new for you and your husband, just give it some time, because they're going to be like, what's wrong with you? You know, like, it's just like you've never acted like that. You've never done whatever. So if you've built up those walls to an extent, whatever it looks like, maybe you're an oversharer, and you decide to start just, all right, I'm going to be concise with what I say a little bit more. They're going to be like, are you okay? Like, are you pregnant? Are you, like, well, they're going to ask, like, all these different things, you know, asking that. So just know it's not going to go great like the first round, maybe the first two. Just, I mean, not saying it won't go great, but it's just going to be new for both of you to kind of weigh that in. And I don't know your husband's personality styles either, you know, so just keep that in mind.
So the first practical tip is pray about it first.
Within conflict.
Is to pray about it first. If it's like it's an ongoing situation that needs to be addressed right now, still say a quick prayer. Our marriage, we're not in it alone. We have the Holy Spirit and God uniting us and working for us as a team. So tap into that. And so make sure you pray about it. And even if it's a bigger issue, maybe spend several days praying about it before coming to him to have the conversation. The second practical tip is forecasting. This was something, I'm going to explain what it is. This is something that really helped us a lot, because I would stuff my emotions and I would let it build until like 4 months later, and then it was an explosion. And I was trying to keep this peace that wasn't even real because I wasn't okay. And so anyways, forecasting is something that we came up with where I will tell him like, hey, I want to talk about this topic. I do not go into my details or my presentation because I already have it put together.
Chances are I'm leaving for work during that time.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, tonight, can we talk about the finances, or can we talk about how you responded to this? Sure. And it gives him enough time to get his mind ready to hear a critique because it's out of love, but also gets him ready of like, okay, well, let me see. It honestly, I think it offers room for the Holy Spirit to convict him before I do, you know? And so I think that's one thing that has been such a good tool for us in our marriages, and it's one that we share with all the college students that are walking through our premarital counseling.
I'll give a little rebuttal to that too. It doesn't maybe give time for me to have conviction of certain things. I mean, our society, masculinity is under attack big time and has been for a long, long time. And so as guys, we get super defensive really quickly because at work, when I was in the trades, you always had to have a quick joke or some way to defend something or whatever it may be. And so like defense comes natural now, I feel like, in all of our kids and all of like men my age growing up too. And so while there may be something Hannah wants to talk about and just says like, hey, tonight, can we talk about this? And it could be great things like just conflict on figuring out mission trips and stuff like that. Like, or stuff at church. Like, having that preface is a great time because I'm quick-witted, but a slow processor. That may be some of your husbands, where he can think of something quick, but is when it comes to processing things a little bit, I just want to chew on it for a second because I don't want to mince words and I want to make what I say count, and I don't want to say something rash. That's something that was trained to me a long time ago, and that's not everybody. But so when Hannah prefaces that with me, it gives me time to kind of think about, well, actually, I hear you, but this is actually the thought I'm having on that. Or let's look at this from a different angle with this, that, or the other. So it gives some time. And even if you can't do it at the beginning of the morning, sometimes that's not the best time to do it either. Just as you think of it, maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, shooting a text out like, just affirming or something, but just say, I want to talk about something later too. It won't always drive it into denial or defense mode. Just, again, from the administrative side, you're getting it out on the table just to begin that discussion and see where it goes. And you're beginning that conflict resolution, not combative mentality too. Because maybe you have a defensive spirit too, where you grew up in a household or you grew up in a relationship too that was, you have to be super defensive and always be ready to give an account for something very quickly. Whereas this is a great time to process together and grow together in that, not just a silo outgrowing each other with some of that too.
All right, the third practical tip is to be a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper. So a peacekeeper sweeps it under the rug and like, oh, it's not that important. We'll deal with that later. That's what I did the first 5 years. And I would put it through the lens of, oh, if it doesn't have an eternal impact, then I'm not going to address it, which was just dumb because it made me, I still was building up bitterness and walls and stuff like that. So peacekeeper is sweeping it under the rug. A peacemaker is having those hard conversations and making real peace in your relationship and calling out when things need to be called out and coming at it with the team mindset. And when you are a peacemaker, then what that means is you're actually going to deal with the emotions instead of stuffing it like I talked about. And then you also, I want to put this caveat too. With anything with conflict, it is okay to call a timeout. It is not okay to leave, but it is okay to call a timeout to where, hey, I'm going to go to another room and process what you just said. We learned that he has to tell me, I'm processing it. I have an answer, but I'm formulating it because he would just get quiet. And I'm sitting there like, he doesn't care. He doesn't love me. And he's actually like overthinking it all. And I'm like, that's how I'm interpreting it. So even the communication of, I'm processing it, just give me a second. And so sometimes that timeout is good. We had one premarital couple, you're not living together yet, right? So they're having this argument in the car, and we had just gone over this with them. They're having this argument in the car, and he got out of the car and just stood like this against the car while she's in the car for a timeout trying to practice it.
It was in February, if that tells you anything. So it was that needed, where he was just like, I need to step out. And so I just need a second to clear my head and get my thoughts together to know what I want to say. Because if you've ever been in an argument, not even with your spouse, but even your child, it just it gets higher and higher and higher. So being able to have the wherewithal to say, can we just take a break? I'm going to go take a lap around the neighborhood. We highly advise, do not get in your car and drive somewhere. Do not do anything like that, but just take a lap around the house. Go somewhere. If you have a prayer closet, or if you just have a backyard, you can just walk in and just high-five a tree and walk back inside or something, just to break up the emotional state of what's going on. It's incredibly practical to just, all right, let's regroup and spend that time we can talk about in the ministry of like, Lord, would you give me clarity to understand this? Or if it's my view that is correct, like, would you help this come across in a different light than the way maybe I'm saying it, if that makes sense?
And if you call the timeout, you call it back in. That's kind of the general rule of like, hey, I need just a second. Then you are the one who, hey, let's finish this discussion.
I think, too, that I want to put a pin in that one as we get ready to be finished with that one. But just, it's okay if it's late at night and you say, can we finish this tomorrow? Like, you don't have to, like, finish it right then and there and you be right and he's wrong, or he be right and you're wrong. That's not the point. The point is to, how are we honoring the Lord and each other through this, even this hard conversation, even maybe some really deep stuff that's really rooted that you may need some extra help with, but being able just to put a pin in it for the evening and say, can we just come back to this tomorrow and talk about, the kids are going to so-and-so, so we can just take some time to do it then too. So just, you don't feel like you have to cap it right there. While that's great, it does give more time to just have reasoning and for him to think about stuff, and also for you to kind of just chew on some stuff too. And it's crazy just how like time can heal some stuff too, just with, let's relax a second and think about this. So,
all right, the third
you want to ask me
level.
that?
You want to do that now or at the end?
It doesn't matter. You can go for it. Let's go number 3.
Okay, the third level is the meaningful conversation, and that's what we were talking about, only 4 minutes. Meaningful conversation is how you're feeling. What are you dreaming about? What are you fearful of? What are you struggling with? It's just the stuff that really matters and makes you as a person. So the first tip for that is time it well. You all have kids, so trying to have a meaningful conversation when your kids are awake just really isn't practical. Anytime we try to do that, it's mom. Everyone just needs to talk to mom or dad at that exact moment. So time it well, time it where your husband and you are both at good energy for the most part before trying to have this conversation. The second practical thing is kind of have an idea of what you're going to talk about. So not just sitting down, what do you want to talk about tonight, And so we have provided a list of prompts they're in our premarital counseling thing, and what they ask you to do is you pick 4 questions you want your husband to ask you, and he picks 4 questions he wants you to ask him. And so when you sit down to really connect and to communicate like that on a meaningful level, then they're just little prompts that can help. Like, hey, what has God really been showing you this week? Or, hey, how can I step in and help you this week? It's just a little tool.
I think, too, one of the most, expected questions I get every day is, hey, how was your day? It's so open-ended. Which part? You know what I'm saying? There's just a ton that happens. So, being specific and asking, too, how was that project going with this situation? Or did y'all win that bid for this thing? Be invested in your husband's career, too, and knowing what he does or what's part of that stuff. And because everybody likes to talk about themselves at some point in their life, right? And so, being able to be invested in that, too, is great, to be on board with that. So you can ask some good critical questions in some regard, but also just help him dream a little bit with maybe a project that's happening with that, too. And I think understanding that, it's something, all this comes to Colossians 3:12, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, verse 13 says, and if one has a complaint against one another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all, it just keeps going. Colossians 3 is just, it's the root of everything we're saying here, of just so intentional to grow out of with that too.
The third thing is to be curious and ask good questions. Those prompts are a great way, but even just being curious, like you already hinted at, of showing interest in what he shows interest in. And a lot of times we don't have the same interest. We had a conversation when we were dating where I was like, I think you would be better with my friend because she has more interests than I do, similar interests. And he was like, I don't like her, I like you. And so anyways, showing curiosity of what he's interested in. And most of the time for me, and maybe it would be the same for you, it's, hey, can you teach me about your interest? And he'll start talking and I just listen and show interest in it. And it really does make that connection with each other. yeah, those.
And let those rabbit trail, like it's okay to let those run. Have some of those conversational starters, and then just let it run with that too, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a second, but just the more you do that, the more easy it becomes in your relationship too. And I don't know what your husband's hobbies are. If he has hobbies, he may not right now, they may be on pause, but just find an idea, like if it's deer hunting, I don't know, if it's car mechanics, if it's computers, if it's Nintendo 64, if it's your kids, I don't know, but finding those dumb little Instagram reels that are in his neighborhood and send it to him, he'll be like, why did you send me this? And so it's one of those things that kind of just gets those kind of wheels turning for conversation stuff too.
All right, this is the last question I have for you. And
you don't want to do that
we're
one?
Done. Well, let's see if we're opening up for other questions.
Okay.
I like this one. What can the wife do to cultivate meaningful conversation and get her husband to talk?
You don't. No, I'm just kidding. I think we all have a shell that we're wearing. Hashtag Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, heroes in a half shell. But that idea of knowing that we want to know that we're valued and trusted is one of the biggest things, because our masculinity is always attacked in different ways. Knowing that we're valued and trusted, and to bring in just I'm outdoors, I'm not a huge hunter, but like if you look at any environments, even if you like watching a bird feeder, they're more than likely going to be willing to eat or to be restful when there's no threats around. And so is your relationship seemed as a threat sometimes with some of these conversations? Because maybe you've tried to have these conversations that had an agenda at the end of it. I think it's great to have an outline, but not an agenda. An outline is I'm going to bounce between these ideas of things that I need to get across or I'd like to get across. But at the same time, an agenda is, well, you said this, and I'm going to use this later, and I'm going to have this, and this is the things we got to get through. Even if you're a type A person, it's okay to know where you want to go in the conversation, but not that you have to be the winner at the end of it. Does that make sense? So like having the idea where you're coming to a mutual agreement on what's happening, and maybe it is that you're right on whatever situation is going on, or the meaningful conversation you're trying to have is intentional, but trying to have an outline to work through this and to see where the Lord takes it, and maybe heals in some of that respect too. So assuring value and trust, non-threatening environment, especially like Hannah said a minute ago, for us it's easier in the evenings when the kids are finally in bed, or if they're in preschool or something, I can come home for lunch for a second or something like that. Like those moments are best for me, and maybe for your husband as well. And then expressing confidence in him. I don't know when the last time you've expressed confidence in your spouse, but that idea that I'm confident that you're providing for our family, even though it may be tight and sometimes you're crushing it, and thank you for that. Like, what's the hardest thing you've had to do this week at work? There was a skid steer that came sideways off. What's a skid steer? So I'm just kidding. Some of y'all might know what that is, but it's okay. But anyway, that idea of express confidence in him, assure value, assure trust, because I can guarantee you he's not getting it in the workplace, if I'm being honest, that maybe they're thankful via paycheck, but maybe they don't express value. And that's a lot of different employments, so not just your husband's, maybe yours. You've experienced that as well. And then secondly, kind of on this note too, is be consistent with trying to have these meaningful conversations. I love the idea that practice makes progress and not perfection, but just the more you have it, the more you're able to just instill these small little meaningful conversations. It helps for us to let our guard down, and it also helps knowing that if it's just true conversation and there's no agenda attached, I'm more likely just to sit, enjoy a cup of coffee, and in the evenings around the fire or something like that, and just have conversation, because I know nothing's going to be played against me or nothing's going to be attacked with that. Or it may be something that I share is like, well, let's dream a little bit more into that. That would be awesome to do that, or something that I get to share that's actually common ground like we used to have when we were dating type thing that grew us closer together too. Does that make sense with that too? So and be efficient with your conversations too. I think just be smart with what you talk about and how you talk about it too, and steward those times well.
Yeah, so that's really all we have.
Oh, one more thing.
Uh-huh.
I don't know this. I just put this on my little note thing, but as men, we will never say it because we're big givers most of the time, but we also like gifts too. When's the last time you bought your husband something even small? Just a token of hey, we'll let you know, just I love you, and this is just something small for you. So if your husband's in the trades, write this down: T25 and size 10 millimeter sockets. Those are the two things that they are going to need the most every day. But I don't mean anything expensive or anything crazy, but just something small. Like Hannah came back from gymnastics 2 weeks ago with Emmy, and like had a milkshake. Like, here, this is for you. And like I was like, are you for real? You know, because there's no way to share this with. You know, like just those types of things. Just saying, hey, I'm still pursuing you, and you'd be surprised in how that kind of kindles, just fosters relationship with some of that too.
And fosters the safe environment you were talking about. Yeah. So Colossians 3. If you haven't read it, read it. Also invite the Holy Spirit in because you're not doing this alone. And then third, seek wise counsel. The mentor moms that you have, they're wise counsel. And if you're struggling with communication, if you're struggling with your marriage, please don't do it alone, because doing it alone does allow the enemy to speak lies sometimes. And the mentors or the Christian influence that you have that you're asking for prayer for, they can speak truth over those lies too. So be sure to be seeking that out as well.
Yeah, I'll say on that note, and we say this to our young couples that we counsel and coach with, be careful what you tell your gal pals and other people about your husband when you're not talking to your husband. Does that make sense? Because that's another attack on masculinity for us, but also our reputation. Because I'd hate to walk into church and Hannah's been talking to some ladies about, well, he's not, whatever, and they like look at me sour and stuff too. I'm like, well, that's something we're trying to work on some stuff, but like, I didn't know that laundry was aired out or whatever it was for that. So just, I know Marco Polo is huge. I hear it all the time in the house, these random bits of conversation. I'm just like, oh my gosh, it cracks me up just hearing. It's great to have connectivity. But just be mindful of what you're telling others about your spouse if you're not even talking to your spouse and working through that stuff too. Just protect him. He's your teammate, right? And so don't let
and you're not saying
any...
Don't talk about it.
Oh, no,
just
for
pick
sure.
wise people to
absolutely.
talk to
Seek
about it.
Seek counsel with friends who are maybe a little bit above you or maybe going through some same circumstances, stuff for sure. But you're not trying to attack him through other people too, if that makes sense. So just be careful not to be toxic in that way, because that's a great way to break trust down. It's not broken all the way potentially, but just, man, it hurts. And it's hard. I say this in team building a lot. Trust is built like a microwave and lost like a light switch. And so it's one of those things, while the switch can be turned back on, it's going to take some time to build that stuff back up.
Mm-hmm. All right. I don't know how much time we have, Louise. Do you want to do questions or no? Oh, yeah.
Today has been rich and wonderful, and we're so glad that you were here and a part of that. I know even our mentors have been taking notes today, thinking, oh, I'm going to try that when I get home. Great stuff, and we so appreciate your heart for ministry. Don't forget, if you have questions and you do not discuss them or don't feel free to discuss them in your group, send them to me or your mentor privately, and we will answer, okay? I won't answer because I'm not as wise as they are, but we will get answers for you. On that note, you'll get next week a card. We have a staff person who does marriage counseling, Kathy Doherty, and we have a card that we'll give you next week. It's just good to know that we have that available. And also the counselor who will be speaking to us next week has a counseling through Lifesong Church. So if you're not a member of this church and did not feel comfortable, talk into Kathy. That's available as well. So anyway, thank y'all so much. A little fun token, nothing big. Thank you so much. In your groups today, you will be talking about Colossians 3. Your focus verses are 12 through 17, and your mentors have information about that. That is a wonderful chapter to just sit in and roll around a while. It could be a life chapter. It is that full and rich. Go with God. We'll see you next week.